Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation, or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Gabe Vasquez. Gabe is the founder of the Nuestra Tierra Conservation Project and currently serves as a city councilor in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Gabe has devoted his entire career to advocacy and conservation, specifically for the people and places in the border region of New Mexico. He's worked for Senator Martin Heinrich, the New Mexico Wildlife Federation, and recently drafted New Mexico's Outdoor Equity Fund legislation, which was the first of its kind in the nation. Growing up in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, Gabe developed a childhood passion for the outdoors while fishing with his father and learning about hunting from his grandfather. The outdoors has remained the focal point of his life, both professionally and personally, whether advising lawmakers on federal land policies or hunting, fishing, and hiking in the Coronado National Forest. But most importantly, Gabe has made it his mission to ensure that people of all socio-economic backgrounds and races can enjoy the outdoors and hopefully one day become advocates for protecting our country's wild places. Gabe was scheduled to be a keynote speaker at Colorado Parks and Wildlife's Partners in the Outdoors Conference, a popular gathering of some of the country's foremost experts in conservation and recreation. But because of the COVID pandemic, the in-person conference was converted into a virtual conference, and instead of an on-stage keynote, Gabe is now appearing on this podcast with me. As you'll hear, Gabe's message of balancing conservation and recreation while ensuring equitable access to the outdoors is a perfect fit with the conference's theme of cultivating common ground to ensure a sustainable future for Colorado's outdoors. This was a fascinating interview, and I left the conversation better informed and inspired by Gabe's leadership and vision. We started out chatting about the formation of the Nuestra Tierra Conservation Project and talking about the history and mission of the organization. Gabe then discussed some lessons he learned from his time working with Senator Heinrich and how a brief stint living and working in Washington, D.C. solidified his love for the West. We discussed New Mexico's Outdoor Equity Fund and how he played a significant role in creating this historic and cutting-edge program. We talk in depth about the importance of getting kids into the outdoors and the idea of how people need to fall in love with the outdoors before they can advocate for it. And as usual, we discuss favorite books, his favorite place in the West, and Gabe offers some timely words of wisdom. A huge thanks to Gabe for taking the time to chat, and thanks again to Colorado Parks and Wildlife for inviting me to be a part of its virtual conference. Visit the episode notes for links to everything we discuss, including the full conference schedule, which will give you access to all the presentations from the virtual conference. There's a ton of exciting and informative content. But in the meantime, enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with Gabe Vasquez. Could you just talk a bit about Nuestra Tierra Conservation Project and kind of the history of that organization and what you guys do and how it came about?
I'm happy to, Ed, and it's a little bit of a long story, and I'll try to condense it as much as I can. But the gist of it is that I grew up lucky enough with a family, really a dad and a grandfather who really valued the outdoors, and not because it was for recreation, but really as part of their upbringing. My grandfather worked on a ranch in Juchipila, Zacatecas, actually in a little town called El Remolino, which means the whirlwind. And so being outdoors for my grandfather was both a way of life, but also a way to put food on the table. And that translated to some traditions and some activities that were passed on to my dad, who then passed them on to me. And so even though I didn't really consider myself a conservationist until I got into an official role or a career path working in conservation, I was lucky enough to grow up in the outdoors, valuing things like clean air and water and wildlife, and understanding why you can't keep a 10-inch white bass or black bass because you have to let the species propagate, right? So basic things like that I learned early on, I realized later was conservation. So when I had the opportunity to work in this field, it was really when I started working for Senator Martin Heinrich in the Las Cruces, New Mexico office, which is where I live now. And I was his Southern New Mexico field representative. And at the time, we were working on a campaign to protect the Organ Mountains Desert Peaks as a national monument. This was during the Obama years. Yep. And the Antiquities Act was the vehicle to get a whole bunch of really important landscapes, both land and marine, protected. And part of my job was, interestingly enough, to talk with some of the opposition, some of the ranchers and agricultural folks who opposed, in general, wilderness and other federal land management issues related to that they thought kind of infringed on their way of life and their ability to do work and that kind of thing. And so it started working for his office where, I started to understand better how the federal government really managed land across its different agencies, and what something like a area of critical environmental concern was, and what something that was a wilderness study area was. I didn't really have a good understanding of that until I worked for the senator's office, and so we helped draw the maps around the monument. We cherry stemmed some sections out that were important to, especially roads and those kinds of things that were important to local ranchers. And then I realized that what was missing from this entire outreach, or from this, community input, was the voice of the Hispanic community, which really is the majority population in Doña Ana County, in which Las Cruces is the county seat. I think we're about 64% Hispanic. And I'm having to go out here and talk to folks who really, just a couple of leaseholders throughout this 500,000 acre monument are considered to be some of the most important stakeholders. And so that didn't sit right with me, and, began to engage some different organizations for their input that weren't in traditionally the conservation space, and working with them to actually say, hey, how would this monument help to increase access or opportunity for your family to get outside, for the Hispanic community to learn about their history, for us to understand the land that we're living on, and to appreciate it and invest in it. And so, cutting that story a little bit shorter, when I left the senator's office and, we had enacted Organ Mountain Desert Peaks, we had a big celebration, big victory for everybody and truly the community here locally. I went to go work on child welfare policy in Washington, D.C. for a firm where I thought my values aligned a little bit closer to what I wanted to do. And that was really help underserved communities just to move forward in life in so many different ways. And I got a call one day when I was out in D.C., living out there for more than a year, from one of my favorite people in this world, Reverend Andrew Black, who is now the public lands field coordinator for the National Wildlife Federation. And Andrew worked with me with Senator Heinrich's office, and he actually went to go, I think, work as a college dean in a small community college in Tampa Bay. And he says, man, I don't know about you, but I hate it out here. I need to get back to New Mexico. He said, I need to get back to New Mexico, and I'm going to go work for the New Mexico Wildlife Federation. And guess what? They're going to pay me. They're going to pay me to hunt and fish and do conservation work. And I said, what? That's crazy, Andrew. I said, how much are you getting paid? And I said, I got a confession to make, Andrew. I said, man, I hate it out here too.
DC's tough, man. I spent a lot of time there. I almost lived there, and I came right back out here. So I know the exact feeling.
Oh man, the rat race at DC and the gratuitous handshaking that goes on there, and folks looking over your shoulders, taking your business card, but seeing who's more important in the room that they can talk to. It slowly ate my soul up and kind of spit me out. And
you survived. It worked out for you.
And I survived. And I think I had a weekend trip planned that weekend to go to the Shenandoah National Park to hike this beautiful trail called the Old Rag, or a mountain called the Old Rag.
I've done it. Yeah.
You've done the Old Rag.
I
And so
have.
I was excited. I saw photos. It's a nice climb up to the top. And damn, Ed, there was about 2,000 other people on the trail with me. Dogs were running in between my legs. Kids were running between my legs.
I know, man.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it was a lot different than the experiences that I've had in New Mexico, where I'm mostly by myself for miles with no cell phone reception, and get to have some quiet and peace and solitude. And so Andrew eventually convinced me to get back out to New Mexico. I didn't need a whole lot of convincing, and so working for the New Mexico Wildlife Federation, one of the things they wanted me to do, Ed, was they said, well, we need your help organizing Hispanic communities around some key conservation issues that we're fighting for. And I said, hey, this is my opportunity to work in something that I love to do, that I didn't think I could have a career in. And so I did it, and I had a great boss in Garrett Vanneklassen, who's just a tremendous mentor to me. And he taught me a lot of important things, and really valued what I was doing in terms of the Hispanic organizing. But then I said, hey, Garrett, if we're gonna organize Hispanic communities or Latino communities, Mexican American communities the right way around this, I said, I'm sorry, but the New Mexico Wildlife Federation right now just doesn't have a whole lot of credibility in Hispanic communities. And so it's really hard for me to go and organize families and youth around the New Mexico Wildlife Federation banner.
Why is that? If you don't mind me asking, where was the disconnect there? Just not a long history of personal history and people that were advocating for the Hispanic community within that organization? Yeah.
I mean, I think in general, I think New Mexico has a complicated racial history, but sure. I think across the West, if you look at, the Wildlife Federation chapters across the West, especially in states that now today have, large minority populations, their staff and their board does not reflect the population of the communities that they're perhaps working in today. And so, they haven't been invested in engaging Hispanic communities for a long time. Now, I will say that's changing, and it's changing. It's trending in the right direction. And I think the Wildlife Federation at the national level in particular is doing a tremendous job with those efforts. But at that time, I think still today, I think every single executive director of the New Mexico Wildlife Federation up until today has been a white male. Yeah. Right. And so that, that tells you a little bit about just the conservation world in general. And so there's no cultural connection there. There's no authentic, desire to communicate or connect with Hispanic communities, because, it also, your lawmakers and your decision makers, if they're also white older males, why do you even need Hispanic folks when you can, have a one-on-one with a decision maker or a county commissioner or whatever it might be? And so there was a big disconnect between conservation organizations and Hispanic communities for a long time. So I said, hey, I want to put together a brand called Nuestra Tierra that has a separate identity and is led by volunteers on the ground that will help us advance the same conservation goals that we're pushing for today, but also identifies other conservation priorities, other access priorities, other important issues to Hispanic communities. And why don't we work on all these things together? I said, but this has got to have its separate website. It's got to have a separate way of operating and communicating. And Garrett loved the idea. And he said, absolutely, do what you need to do. I support you 100%, which says a lot about Garrett. And, yes. A lot of people talk today about white allyship and in the movement of supporting people of color in the conservation movement and beyond. And I like to look at that moment as probably one of the exemplary moments when it comes to white allyship, because very easily Garrett could have said, you know what, if the New Mexico Wildlife Federation can't claim credit for it or put its name on it, I'm not going to pay for it. Right. Because everybody's competing for funds and everybody wants to get their name out there in the press as doing good things. But rather than saying that, Garrett said, absolutely. And it doesn't matter if our name is on it or not, because it's the right thing to do. So anyhow, fast forward 3 years, and my ethos with creating this program was, let's connect Hispanic communities to all of these places that we're trying to protect. That way, when we make an ask or when we say that a community supports, protecting the Gila River or, a forest management plan, that they have actually been there, right? That young people in that community can actually tell you where the Gila hot springs are at. Even if they live in a little mining community of Bayard, 20 miles away. So, many of the people in those communities haven't explored those places. And so, so we decided to form a 501c3 last year. A new executive director came on board for the New Mexico Wildlife Federation named Jesse Dubell. Also a tremendous human being that I enjoy working with. And I said, Jesse, I wasn't working at the Wildlife Federation anymore. And I said, Jesse, we've created something really special with Nuestra Tierra, and it needs to be its own organization, and it needs to pull away from the incubator that was the New Mexico Wildlife Federation. And I didn't know how he was going to take it, because because the Wildlife Federation was essentially then now using it to fundraise. Right. Yeah. It was a program that they were fundraising for. And so Jesse, just another amazing, great person, said, you know what, you're absolutely right. This can stand on its own two legs, and it should be run by and for people of color. So we incorporated the organization last year and had a couple of things we wanted to work on right off the bat, like the Outdoor Equity Fund in New Mexico, which we had been conceptualizing for the last year or so. And we said, man, this is going to be the thing to kick this organization off, is we're going to get this bill passed in the New Mexico legislature, and it's going to be a game changer, and it's going to be created by and written by people of color. Anyway, so that's a long answer to the story, but it hopefully provides some important context of, at least my role in helping to create this and then handing it off to a whole bunch of other really cool people working in this space.
No, that was a great explanation, and you never have to apologize for going long on the podcast, because I feel like that's why podcasts are great, because you can get into the details. I think we were emailing yesterday. I had to do a radio interview the other day, and I think I had, out of an hour, I had a total of about 4 minutes to talk. And I was like, who listens to this? So no, don't just keep, I love everything you're saying. I want to dig into some of the details around the organization, but right now, while I'm thinking about it, again, the benefit of having my own podcast, I can do whatever I want. So you grew up and you went to college, and then you were coming out. Why did you decide to go into government, politics, kind of this field of service? Because I would imagine you had your choice of pretty much anything you wanted to do, and yet you chose a hard path that's not known for making people rich. It's a path because you're passionate about it. And so, and like you said, your first job with the senator was talking with people who didn't agree with you. So what drove you to do that work right out of school? Because that seems rare for a young man to have that I guess have his values so lined up at age 22 or 23.
Yeah, that's it. That's a great question. And, my major was in journalism in school. And I, going back a little bit to maybe what brought me there, my upbringing, and as a first generation American, my mom crossed the border when she was 9 months pregnant. I was the first in my family, huge family, to be born on this side of the border.
Oh, wow.
In El Paso, Texas, was the start of something beautiful for our family. It was the start of a migration as border people, right? As people who grew up in Ciudad Juarez across the what is now the Great Wall of the border from El Paso, Texas. We grew up crossing back and forth, but we were always Mexican citizens, and so I was the first to be born on the other side, and I always felt like I had a huge weight on my shoulders to carry the values of my family and the hopes of my family on my shoulders. And I think Although I wasn't the greatest student in high school, and it took me a while to find my path in college. Eventually, I knew that I wanted to circle back to helping people and to give other people an opportunity to succeed, because I felt like I had been given an amazing opportunity to succeed. And so, journalism to me was the fourth estate. Yeah, holding people accountable, holding decision makers accountable for decisions that they're making for communities and for people. So this passion of kind of social justice was rooted in being able to uncover some of the things that were happening behind the scenes. And journalism has changed, I mean, so much from what I envisioned when I was a journalism student in college. I fear that it's just going absolutely the wrong way. It's been corporatized, and it's become a big entertainment kind of industry, the way I mostly see it now. Not in every place, because I have so much respect for so many journalists doing the great work out there. But, if you look at what people are consuming the most on cable news and other mediums, social media and that kind of stuff, it's just become a big entertainment industry, which drove me away from journalism.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And getting into politics. I said, okay, if I can't hold decision makers accountable, hell, I'll go work for them and make sure that they're doing the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then eventually, running for local office was the next step in that progress, I guess, in saying that, okay, well, now that I've learned how the system works, and now that I know a little bit about policy, I think I can make the right decisions. I think I can be a good representative for my community. And so a combination of those things, I think, led me to working in public policy, working for the senator's office. And like you said, not for a whole lot of money, not for a paycheck, but in an effort to try to actually make change and systemic change. And so that's a little bit of how I got there. And, my family's still on both sides of the border. My dad lives in a beautiful little town called San Carlos in the state of Sonora, and my mom lives in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I'm kind of right in the middle, right on the border. So it's, I still carry both of those identities with me in the work that I do.
Well, I've heard such great things about Senator Heinrich. I believe we have a mutual friend in Hal Herring. I actually listened to you on his podcast, and
oh, sure.
Yeah. And somebody from the senator's office had reached out to me at some point, and I checked in with Hal because he's my walking encyclopedia, and he just went crazy talking about what a just unbelievable conservationist he is, the senator. And so, I mean, I would imagine that was a wonderful training ground for what you're doing. So from the time you started working with him until the time you decided to move away, I mean, what were the biggest lessons you learned from being on the ground in that world? Because I used to just be kind of pessimistic about a lot of national politics. But then through my other job at Palmer Land Trust, I did some lobbying up in DC and went and met with people, different representatives and senators about some of this conservation work. And I left very inspired and very hopeful for the whole scene, everybody from the senators and reps that I met with to their staffs. And there was probably only one or two that I was not impressed with. Everybody else was just amazing, and it was inspiring. And I left feeling better about it all than I had before I showed up and didn't know anything. So, I mean, what were your big lessons learned from that time?
Yeah, I think there was a lot. And I'll call him Martin because he's now a good friend, and we talk often now. In fact, we talk more now that I'm not on his staff than we did when I was working for him. But I'd like to think that it was a two-way street, two-way relationship. I felt like I had a lot to offer his office and him personally, as a senator who grew up in Albuquerque, or who at least was from Albuquerque. I think he grew up in Missouri, but he, Southern New Mexico, I knew was not a place that he knew as intimately as other parts of the state. And so I felt like I had a lot of value and a lot of understanding to hopefully bring to decisions that he was making on behalf of that part of the state. And so I remember thinking, especially when I was working on that monument campaign, Ed, I was a little frustrated because I was thinking, man, I signed up for this job so I could make real change in people's lives. I was also working on immigration policy for his office, but I remember thinking, man, how are public lands going to feed people? How are public lands going to solve the healthcare inequality in our rural colonias, and how are we going to make actual change by designating a monument? I don't know. I'm not sure that this is what people need. And I remember having that conversation with Martin, and he said, some very inspiring things about how he had made some of the most important decisions in his life, including the decision to run for Senate, while he was in the Gila National Forest on a backpacking trip, and how public lands had brought him clarity, and being outdoors in general just was a therapeutic and a special place for him. And then I thought about my own experiences outdoors, and I said, you know what, I can't lie. It's been that for me too. I need to clear my head. I go on a run. I go hike. I have the privilege of making, important decisions or clearing my head when I'm outdoors. And I said, that's it. That's what public lands can bring to my community. If we can all access these places, this is a mental health, a physical health asset as well for the community, right? But also just, that reconnecting with the land and that feeling at peace and that investment in community, because you feel at home at a place where, you see the backdrop of these beautiful mountains every morning. That's what it can bring. And so Martin taught me and how to make that connection. And so that was something special to me. Today, I think just yesterday, we were going back and forth on the passage of the Great American Outdoors Act, which includes full funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and some of the work that I do now involves a lot of that federal policy. And so me and Martin are kind of joking back and forth about the process that it's taken to get to this place, and I absolutely believe we couldn't have done it without somebody like Martin pushing, not just in New Mexico, but, he spent the last week whipping votes, from his colleagues and from those on the other side of the aisle to get this thing done. But what I loved to see was his floor statement on the Senate yesterday, or the day before yesterday, Ed, was all about equity in the outdoors. And it was all about getting different people outside. And I'm not going to lie, I felt like I influenced that a little bit.
No, right? You did, man. You definitely did.
I felt like, because we have created this narrative in New Mexico that public lands aren't important until everybody gets to enjoy them, that reframing this whole thing about protecting the outdoors as an environmental and a social justice issue is something that I think he's incorporated into his work. And similarly, now that I'm working in conservation, I've incorporated a lot of things he taught me into my work. So hopefully it's a two-way street, but I think he's doing it the right way. I think he's talking about it the right way. And I hope others that are in positions of influence take a cue from him too.
Yeah, I've heard such great things about him. And that speaks, I think, it speaks to your influence and your ability to tell these stories and think these things through very deeply and then communicate them in a way that makes sense. And it speaks to him as a leader to listen. I would imagine some of those folks are they think they know everything. And the fact that he is willing to admit when he doesn't know something and find the best of the best to advise him. I mean, that's how it's supposed to work. And that passing of that bill, at least to the Senate, as of this recording, it made me feel so much better. We needed a bright spot,
Oh yeah. We did. And like I said, I think his messaging on it, considering what else is happening around us in this world and in this environment, is the right way to not just message this bill, right? Because you never want to say you're messaging something for other purposes, but truly, this is a historic moment, and you have to contextualize it to the political and social times that we have today. And so by making sure that this creates access for everybody, all people in this country, especially the growing minority population, is the reality of the world we live in. And so bringing those two things together makes me feel good about the Senate working on this now, and passing this now. And so Honestly, I just can't wait till this thing is done, though, because I've been working on it for way too damn long.
Well, man, the thing is, if it was easy, it would have been done a long time ago. So we needed your grinding on it. So I love hearing that. You mentioned the Outdoor Equity Fund a few minutes ago, and I did a little bit of research on it, but I'd love to hear more about that. Can you explain what that is and how it came about?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Ed, and that's something I'm very proud of, and I think I hope that other states will come up or embrace a similar model, perhaps, of how to invest in communities in the very real sense of the word, in terms of funding real dollars on the ground. Mm-hmm. But it came it came by like a lot of other probably good ideas over a couple of beers and writing on a napkin with a pen that we found that was like leaking in somebody's pocket. We started thinking actually about this push. Let me clarify. When I say we, it was State Representative Angelica Rubio and myself were at this fun little Mexican bar that we like to go to that has probably the cheapest beers in town. And they start their happy hours pretty early. So if you want to get some real work done in terms of creative brainstorming, that's the place to go. And there had just been an op-ed that ran in the Albuquerque Journal from two white progressive legislators, and they were touting this bill that they were going to introduce to get a outdoor office of recreation for New Mexico. Yep. Right. And this is not a new concept. At the time, I think there was maybe 6 or 7 other offices of outdoor rec. There's quite a few more now, but the whole thing was about how many billboards can we put up to attract, out of towners to come to New Mexico and explore the culture and the mountains and the rivers and the forests and the deserts. And it's going to be great for our economy. And, for me and Representative Rubio, that just that narrative didn't sit right with us, because we knew about the inequities that exist within our own communities to access these special places. So, we said, how can we leverage the political momentum of creating an Office of Outdoor Recreation to bring equitable access to Native communities, to rural communities, to Hispanic communities across the state? And Representative Rubio has, she has just built a great career for herself on the foundation of social justice and now environmental justice as a state legislator. And I knew that, that she could get a whole bunch of other people on board if we just came up with the right concept to bring an equity component to an Office of Outdoor Recreation. Now, this was the time when Governor Lujan Grisham was, former Congresswoman Lujan Grisham was running for governor in New Mexico. And she eventually ended up creating the Office of Outdoor Recreation part of her economic development policy platform. So Representative Rubio and I had spent years, working with and organizing with all kinds of different communities of color, working on all different issues, whether it's civil rights or LGBTQ rights or immigrant rights, housing rights. We had just had the privilege of being alongside a bunch of good folks that were fighting to make New Mexico a better place for everybody. And we came up with a concept, and this was really out of experience in working on these conservation campaigns, where funders would come in and say, "Hey, we need a picture of a brown family in this national forest or in this mountain range, so that we can run a newspaper ad, or so that we can run a Facebook video, or so that we can we can show that there's some diverse support for whatever we're trying to do." And then the campaign either fizzled out or something good happened, whatever legislation passed or favorable, forest plan or BLM plan, and the money was gone. Mm-hmm. And that means those kids who got to go outside and experience those cool things no longer have that money to do it. And the organizations that were doing the work on the ground no longer have the money to do it. And so I always thought that's just a little wrong, a little disingenuous, right? I mean, there's a little bit of tokenizing and using communities and using people. But I mean, I myself had been on that end of things, right? I was, as part of my work for Nuestra Tierra, had been doing some of that. And I was like, man, well, where's the money to continue doing the fishing trips? Where's the money to continue doing the kayaking trips? Well, we don't have it because the funder moved on to another priority. Mm-hmm. And so the Outdoor Equity Fund was really born out of this idea that there's organizations that are doing work on the ground who are connecting people of color in underserved communities, including white folks, to these places that if they just had small investments to buy hiking boots, to buy camping gear, tents, sleeping bags, fishing poles, lures, fishing licenses for kids, that they might be able to keep some of these programs going year after year. But there's not one foundation out there or not one state grant out there that's going to pay for $5,000 worth of equipment, to recreate outdoors. Yeah. That's not how the funders and the foundations operate. And so we said, we need money for the Boys and Girls Club. We need money for Families and Youth Incorporated. We need money for the Pueblo of Tezuque. We need money for the city of Deming. All these little places that don't have the infrastructure, don't have those big outdoor rec programs, so that they can get this gear for these kids.
Sure.
And by default, they're already serving underserved communities because we're one of the poorest states in the country. So if we just created a fund, and originally what we thought was, look, who's going to benefit from an Office of Outdoor Recreation? It's going to be the REIs of the world, right? Yep. The North Faces of the world, those stores that make a killing from the tourism and from even locals who, rent snowshoes or buy, expensive puffy jackets or whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. We should have a fund ready to go for these companies to donate to, that go straight to underserved communities. That way, as they're profiting, right, as they're making money, they're also putting some philanthropic dollars back into communities that really need, those dollars to get kids outside. And so the Outdoor Equity Fund is just a simple concept of a private public fund created in the state treasury and administered by the Office of Outdoor Recreation that provides microgrants. I think the initial microgrants that went out this year, that are going out this year, are from $1,500 to $5,000. To local governments, so counties, cities, nonprofits, the Boys and Girls Club, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and the Native American, sovereign nations and tribal governments that also have their own outdoor recreation programs, whether it's part of a youth council or some other mechanism. And these microgrants can help pay for a 15-passenger van. They can help pay an outfitter. They can help pay a fishing guide. They can help pay for 30 pairs of hiking boots. It's really almost unrestricted, as long as it facilitates getting youth outside. And then we said, okay, well, we got to make this geographic equity too, right? So we want to make sure that if they want to have a pheasant shooting class in Hobbs, New Mexico, and they want to have an introductory fishing class in the Pueblo of Santo Domingo, and then they want to have an urban forestry class in Albuquerque, that this fund would help pay for all of that. And so, we kind of set these three categories of grantees to make sure that the funds get spread evenly across New Mexico and into all those communities. And I think that's how we got some of the bipartisan support for this fund, because, it could help different types of communities, whether they're represented by a Democrat or a Republican. So that was the idea. And, we got this coalition of intersectional organizations that Angelica, that Representative Rubio and I had been working with, to send a letter to the governor and say, we had the bill written at that time already. And we told the governor at that time, or we asked the governor, hey, we will not support the creation of an Office of Outdoor Recreation unless it has this Outdoor Equity Fund attached to it, because the people of New Mexico, the youth of New Mexico, need this. And it's completely inequitable to invest in getting mostly rich folks to come to our state without giving something back to our own communities. And the governor just, she responded very favorably. And even though those original legislators who didn't want this equity fund attached to their outdoor rec bill, I mean, who knows? Maybe they thought it was stealing some of their thunder. Whatever it might be, they said, we want a clean bill. We want a clean bill. And we said, no, screw your clean bill. We're going to fight like hell for this. And we went straight to the governor, and we knew without the governor's support, this thing wasn't going to go anywhere. She has veto power. And so she went back to the legislators, or her staff did, and said, hey guys, the governor's not going to support this. They're not going to do this without an equity fund built into it. So we regained our seats at that table, and it was all these organizations that had a play in a whole bunch of other issues and legislation that was important to the governor, saying, hey, conservation is important. Outdoors are important to us. Anyways, long story short, we got the fund created, and we got some initial money, on the public side of things. I think we got about $150,000. We'd asked for $500,000, which we're still working on. Mm-hmm. But we got a small annual appropriation. I think it's $100,000 now annually. And then we got, some money from REI. We got some money from the Turner Foundation that has several ranches here in New Mexico into the fund. North Face just contributed some money, which is great to the fund. And the grants have started going out the door this year. And the new director of the Office of Outdoor Recreation in New Mexico, Axi Navas, has been a champion for the program, has just really wanted to see the program grow. And so she has been a great steward of this program. And, we look forward to having $500,000, $1 million in there in a few years. I have a plan. Of how to do it. And it involves weed.
That's for our part two. We'll do a part two and dig into that. Since
you're in Colorado, you know all about.
That. Man! But a lot of money.
No, there's actually some great allies that have come together with some good plans for a more sustainable public funding stream for the Outdoor Equity Fund, and let's just say it involves cannabis.
Is it on your ballot? Is it going to be on the ballot this year to legalize marijuana?
It's not on the ballot, but we're coming closer and closer legislatively to getting a bill passed. We had one passed out of the House last year, but taking a little chunk of that excise tax into Outdoor Equity Fund is something we're in conversation about with some of the cannabis community, the proponents of that bill. And so far we've had a pretty warm reception. So potentially we'll see where that goes. But so it's still a process with the Outdoor Equity Fund in terms of, making it sustainable long-term.
If you guys make marijuana legal, the city of Trinidad here in Colorado, which is the southernmost city on I-25, is going to be heartbroken because when you ride through, that is like the marijuana shop capital of Colorado. One more question about that fund. So how have other states reacted to that now that you got it up and going, you got it funded? Are other states trying to follow suit, or have you been talking with other states about it? Because maybe I'm missing something, but I haven't heard of anything like that anywhere else.
I think other states are definitely talking about it. In fact, Colorado was one of the first states to reach out.
Nice.
The Conservation Colorado, I think they have a program called Protégete that has been pretty successful in organizing around climate justice and environmental justice issues, came to the forefront. Hispanic Access Foundation, which has some presence there in Colorado, has also reached out, and National Wildlife Federation also has been a part of the convening process in terms of getting a core group of folks together to work on a similar effort in Colorado. And so they, I've had a chance to talk with a bunch of those folks, and I think the stage that the Colorado effort is in now is really kind of on a fact-finding mission, recognizing that what works for New Mexico is might be different than what works for Colorado. And so for New Mexico, we are either the first or second poorest state, depending on the year. And so for us, the barriers to access to the outdoors, it all boils down to money, to equipment, to resources, to having, those really small local governments or small nonprofits have access to this equipment that's what we saw as the primary barrier, and how we could solve this outdoor equity issue, or at least begin to solve it. And in Colorado, I think that might look a little bit different. There's more money in the state. The communities that have and don't have are a little bit different. The makeup is a little bit different in terms of the population density and where you could actually impact the youth who most need a resource like this. So I think they're on a fact-finding mission as a coalition of organizations this year, and they've already started talking to state legislators who are going to carry this bill, as far as I know.
That's so. Yeah. I mean, that is really an amazing accomplishment, and it's one of these things that it speaks to a lot of the issues that are going on in this country right now, of people kind of being in their own little bubble and not realizing the privilege they have. I mean, I've realized that a lot recently with the COVID stuff, especially. We're stuck at home, but I can go out and go to open spaces and go running on these trails. And I think how great it is because it's free, it's open land, it's public land. I can go do whatever I want. But up until recently, I don't think I've ever thought in depth about, it's free, but there's a lot of damn money that goes between me leaving my house and me going there, and a lot of privilege that goes between the two. I mean, I've got a job that I can get off at 6 and I can leave, and we've got childcare if we need it. My wife and I have flexible schedules. I've got the money to go buy, $130 pair of running shoes. I got a car to get me over there. Just this endless list of things that I just have taken for granted. And I hate it that I miss that stuff, like it takes some crazy thing like this. Cause I consider myself curious, and I want to be progressive, and I want to hope, I try to be fair in my thinking, and then I can just completely miss something like that. I mean, is that a common reaction you get when you're finally able to get your, these important ideas into people's heads like mine who are trying, you know what I mean?
No, that's a good realization. I mean, that's some good self exploration there, right? Of just how systems work, but also how money impacts a household and the things that you're able to do and not to do. We had a member of a committee. I won't mention his name, but he just lost his primary in the New Mexico legislature as a state senator that was on a committee that was hearing the outdoor equity fund. And he made a comment when we had a couple of folks go up and testify about how important it was for kids to get outdoors. And he says, "What is this? Why would we spend public taxpayer dollars on getting young people outdoors? Do they not just realize that they can open their back door and they're outside? How hard is it to do that? Why do we need to pay for that?" And I think that's on a very, dumbed down level part of, I think what you're saying, right? Yeah. Is like when you have so much privilege that you don't have to worry about gas money, reliable transportation, equipment, gear, even knowledge or understanding of where to go outdoors. Because people have shown you, or you have, had the privilege to explore. Yep. It can seem like that, right? Why can't these kids do the same thing that I do? Or why can't their families do the same thing that I do? Especially in a state like New Mexico, which is mostly rural and has just tons and tons of public land surrounding almost every community. And yeah, I mean, one thing is to go outdoors in your backyard, if you happen to even have a backyard, right? You're not living in a 3-story apartment on in a 1-bedroom with 4 or 5 of your family members. But one thing is to go outdoor in your backyard if you even have the privilege to have a backyard. Exactly. And another thing is is again, right, to find healing and to find understanding in these amazing public landscapes that we all cherish, where we camp, where we hike, where we fish, that we have to drive hours to, that only we know the special little county roads, on how to get to our favorite camping spot under that big, oak tree that we love and have made memories and all that kind of stuff. It's like we are few and far between the people who get to have those experiences. So going outside is not opening your screen door and, listening to the birds chirp in the morning. To me, going outside is these transformational experiences that you get outdoors that contribute to your mental health and your understanding and appreciation of the natural world. That's the type of experience that a lot of young people that are underprivileged will never get to have unless somebody shows them the way. And so we need more of that. We absolutely need more and more of that.
Yeah, and then you fast forward out 30 years from now, and the only way anybody is going to care to fight to conserve these places is if they love the places. The only way, you're not going to fall in love with these places by watching them on TV or YouTube or something. I mean, you have to be out there in them. You have to. And so it's a long-term investment in conservation. That's another way to look at it, is you're creating the next generation of advocates, this pool of people that have all this great potential that just have not, through no fault of their own, have not had the access to the area. And so, I mean, you're creating conservationists, which is pretty inspiring to think about.
That's damn right, Ed. That's exactly right. And I think, we also heard from other people that were in the conservation field or conservation space and said, well, doesn't YCC do that? Youth Conservation Corps, aren't they taking underprivileged youth outdoors? And I said, I love the work that they do. I love that they're paying young people for their time and that, there's federal funding out there for it. But a young person of color building a trail or removing an invasive species for weeks on end is going to have a much different experience than a young person of color rafting down the Rio Grande Taos box with all his friends, or, catching a big, juicy, rainbow trout at Fenton Lake. And that matters, right? Because the experience and how you associate your connection to the outdoors, like you said, if you love it, you'll want to protect it, and you're like, well, what makes, why are the waters high in the spring and not in the summer? Why, what, as it pertains to your rafting experience that you had in the Taos box, why are rainbow trout and a non-native species? Who put them here? Why are they, what are the native? All those things that make you think about a positive experience you had turns you into a conservationist, wants you to protect that place. If you spend your time removing graffiti off of rocks on a trail, or, cutting down trees or clearing brush, whatever it might be, your mind doesn't operate the same. You're not thinking the same. You're not loving that place as much as you would as if you were enjoying yourself. And so there is an intrinsic value in a young person enjoying an outdoor space that you can't replicate with programs like YCC or others. Not saying it doesn't happen, because those are amazing programs. And I'm sure that lots of kids go on to conservation work or jobs that may do that. But like you said, what makes you fall in love with a place? It's probably not always going to be work. It's going to be fun. So that's why it's important to fund this, to fund fun.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. Definitely. I love your passion is infectious about it. I mean, it gets me excited, and man, it's so important. I love doing this podcast just because I get to talk to people like you all day. When things seem down, there's no better antidote than talking to people that are passionate about what they're doing. And so you've got this endless resume of outdoor public lands, recreation, and people are going to think we're making this up because I don't know how you do it. But then on top of that, you're a city councilor. So another form of service, but in a completely, not completely, but in a kind of a different realm of things. When did you start doing that? And from what I understand, you're the youngest city councilor there in Las Cruces, correct?
Oh man, that's a success story right there. And I'm not going to take credit for it, but maybe I'll feel like I had maybe a little bit of something to do with it just to make myself feel good. But I am no longer the youngest person on the city council.
Oh, wow. Cool.
And I held that title for I guess about a year and a half or a little bit longer than that. And we had two great, amazing new city councilors here in Las Cruces who won their elections, that are two young women of color, younger than me, who now sit on the dais with me, and they're amazing partners and colleagues in the work that we're doing at the city. But at the time it was, I think, just right after the presidential elections, the last presidential elections, and like a lot of people, I didn't want to get out of bed and was just wondering what the fate of my community was going to look like under what I personally thought was a very troubling candidate for president at that time. And so I said, damn it, what can I do that's a meaningful way to actually, kind of act as a firewall to some of the things that are going to happen nationally. And I figured running for local government might be one of those things. And so I took a shot, and I knocked on a lot of doors, and, I made cool flyers and all that kind of stuff, which was really fun. You never know how fun it is to just like Photoshop your face onto things until you're actually doing it. And you're just like, man, I look like that.
I'm a grown up. That's what I always think. I'm like, am I a grown up?
That's right. Putting on a suit all the time. And this isn't me, but man, I kind of like it. It's a good look. But did all that stuff, and was happy to get elected. I was running against the president of the Tea Party at the time. It made me, I think I won with like 73 or 74% of the vote. And so I was like, okay, this speaks good for for the way that I think understand my community, and the values that they have, at least in my district. And so I was happy with that outcome. But, man, it's been like going back to school. I got put on the Utilities Commission. The city of Las Cruces runs its own, water, wastewater, sewer, and natural gas utility, and solid waste authority as well. And so, man, I've had to learn all about, arsenic and iron levels on the side of the Jornada Bolsa, and why we have to invest in these really expensive filters, that have set us back because we didn't drill the wells in the right place, 50 years ago. Yeah. And how that impacts our water delivery system across, 100,000 homes, and have had to learn about, natural gas and what kind of decisions we're going to make in terms of investing in, a finite resource that will eventually be electrified, probably by solar or some other means, to actually provide heating to homes, and, make decisions about how much money do we invest in adding new natural gas lines versus, just embracing the future, which is electrification through renewable energy sources. And then, looking at municipal budgets and funding museums and funding police departments and fire departments. Oh man, I was like, did I really sign up for all this? I just wanted to say some cool things and have people listen, Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And have people return my damn calls. But no, it's been an experience. It's been really, really fulfilling. And it's really a full-time job. So it takes its toll. It's a lot of work. But I'm happy to have, new counselors come in behind me that have similar, if not almost the same, values and outlook on life that will help carry the torch forward, so that, local governments and decision makers look a lot different than when I was growing up.
I feel like another bright spot from this whole COVID crisis, there are a lot of them that I've seen as far as reframing your kind of well-worn perspective, reframing my well-worn perspective on things. But I think a bright spot has been the people appreciate their local government, because I think it's pretty clear that the federal government isn't going to be the savior. And so, I think people are a lot more engaged in everything from city council to county commissioners, all the way up to governor, as to who actually has their best interest in mind. So that has overall, has it It's been a lot, but has it been as rewarding as you had hoped it would be?
Yeah, absolutely. It really has. It's been incredibly satisfying. I have really just tried to, operate in a way that puts people and community first, that listens to the needs in a very localized level, like you said, of my district. We have the hottest urban area in the entire city is located in my district, and it's actually a corridor that leads up to a middle school where lots of kids are walking every day back and forth. It's called the Nevada Corridor. And, when I first came on board, the study had just come out, and, we said, man, we got to do something for this neighborhood and for these kids. This is a low income neighborhood. And they're, when the temperatures up here get to 106, 107 degrees in the summer, I mean, you walk through that corridor, they're like 120 degrees because it's just it's all concrete. It's the entire housing district there are cinder block houses, and you mix that in with tons of concrete and cement, and almost no green spaces, and you're living in a microwave. And so I was like, man, we gotta rebuild this entire corridor, and we gotta add rainwater harvesting, shade trees, and we got to get a park going. So we were able, we came up with a plan. We purchased the property that we're turning into a park. Currently, we're rebuilding that entire street to add trees that will line the entire street, and we'll get the heat index down considerably. We'll have community spaces for people to actually gather and talk to each other. And then we're narrowing the street, these days of having these giant, roadways built for just motorists, I think are going to, they're going to come to an end here soon. And so I said, we got to reinvest in these neighborhoods. And so that's one project I've been proud of. But I think when I leave the council, as much of that as I can do, I'll feel really good about my ability to impact some of the local projects here and policy.
I keep wondering this, and I'm just going to ask, how old are you?
I'm 35.
Man.
Yep. Yeah, I'm old as far as I know, kid.
No, you're not old, man. You're not. No, you're cranking, man. I am. I won't put you on the spot now, but I'm gonna be very interested. We'll talk about it offline because I want to know what your long-term plans are. I think they should be very big.
Hey, I appreciate that, Ed. It's a struggle. I think we just talking about this right before we started. We pushed the record button, but man, finding that work-life balance is, it gets harder and harder the older you get and more responsibilities you get. And I can't imagine how much tougher it is when I, build a little family and all that, all the attention you rightfully have to pay to things that are not work, right. Are going to be, things that have to take priority, but thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, and in my limited experience, it always is hard, but when you're doing something that you're passionate about and it's something you believe matters, it makes it a lot easier. It makes it, you can do it, versus, going to some job that you may not be excited about that's making somebody else a lot of money. It's, the passion goes a long way. Not that I'm an expert, but I can't believe it, but we're coming up on an hour. And so do you mind if we run through the quick questions that I sent your way, and then I'll let you go on to, there's no telling, you probably got like 3 full work days ahead of you after this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is your show, Ed, and I know I've been pretty wordy and have talked a lot. So
I love it. Yeah.
Man. Anything you want to chat about, just let me know. I'll follow your lead.
Cool. Well, I read a ton, and the people who listen to this podcast love reading. And one of the best things on here is all the book recommendations that come from my guests. So when you think about generally the American West, usually I like to know books about the American West, but really any books that have been important to you and your leadership mindset, your service mindset, natural resources. What are there a few books that come to mind that have kind of guided your personal journey through all this?
Yeah. And, I think maybe mine might be a little bit different. I think because my experience, getting into conservation work later in my life, I don't think I had like a whole lot of formative things that inspired me to do what I do today. I try to read as much as I can now on conservation related topics, but there's a couple of books that I think helped shape at least my identity of the world and my outlook on the world when I was a kid. And I didn't learn English till I was in third grade.
Oh wow!
I moved from Ciudad Juarez to Bloomington, Indiana, which was like a crazy culture shock. Although Bloomington is a beautiful little town, but one of the first books, a couple of books that I read when I was first learning English that I remember today. I think The Outsiders was one of the first like adult books that I got to read.
Yeah.
I think who was it? S.E. Hinton, I think, was the author who wrote that. But growing up as a Mexican kid in Indiana, and this whole comparison between the greasers and the socios, right, in that storyline of The Outsiders, I always identified with the greasers, right? I was like, man, I'm like a greaser, right? Even though I think that book was set like in Oklahoma or something. I don't remember, somewhere in the Midwest. But I was just like, man, I thought, man, you know what? I'd rather be a greaser than a socio anyway. These guys have a lot more fun, and I really identify. But it also taught me a lot about America in the sense of like the social classes and how people are treated, and the what we were just talking about, the systemic equities and inequities that exist within different communities. So The Outsiders was a great book that when I read early on, I was like, man, it shouldn't be like this. That was a good one. And then, I remember my mom bringing me home some of these classic English literature books with big pictures on every other page and big bold font, in an effort for me to learn English, but that also really stuck with me. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. My absolute favorite, which maybe this is more of a conservation book, I guess, if you think about it that way, but Call of the Wild by Jack London.
Oh yeah.
That's one of the books that I remember in my time, growing up, let me completely escape to a different reality. But somehow it was like within reach, it wasn't like a Frankenstein or a Time Machine. It was like Alaska.
Sure.
So Call of the Wild was a cool book for me growing up. And hell, I always wanted a dog like Buck growing up as a kid. I'm like, if my dog doesn't live up to the expectations of a buck, then I don't want that dog. I've had lots of good dogs since then. But then, when I first started getting into fishing, it was my brother that got into fishing. He ordered In Fisherman and Field and Stream, and they would come to our house, and we would read them religiously. We'd sit there, and a lot of things we couldn't even understand, but we look at all the pictures, and then I think we ordered from those In Fisherman videos, we ordered like those Bill Dance.
Oh yeah,
fishing outdoors videos.
I remember that guy
on VHS, and so we'd get the VHSs in the mail, and we'd be watching, Bill Dans, catching those big old black bass and giving them a kiss, and we were like, man, this guy's cool. We want to do that. So it was just a kind of a crazy, weird, eclectic mix of things that I grew up with. I just finished reading There, which is it's a book by this guy named Tommy Orange, and it's really more of a urban book, but it's really this experience of like these native youth and native families that are interwoven and tied together by how they end up being at the same powwow. But it documents the experiences that native communities and native people have had across the West, or at least on the West Coast. That's really powerful and emotional and really eye-opening in terms of the experiences of many native communities today. So that's a book I'd recommend to anyone. There, by Tommy Orange, man. That's like a gripping, mesmerizing read. It's that, you won't be able to put that down.
Yeah. Well, for people listening, I'll put links to all of these books in the notes. So you can, if you're driving, don't start reading.
Oh, sure.
Just they can click through. No, those are great. And I think somebody had mentioned there to me a while back, and I did not write it down. So that's perfect. Thanks. When you think about New Mexico or the West in general, but it seems like New Mexico is where your heart is, do you have a favorite specific place there, whether it's on top of a mountain somewhere, a specific stream, a specific place you like to hunt, and, don't give away any secrets, but is there, where is your favorite place in New Mexico?
Oh man, that's easy for me. It's got to be the Coronado National Forest in the New Mexico Boot Heel. It's just this amazing, beautiful place. I think actually on that podcast that we did with Hal Herring, I kind of sent a cold call, or I sent an email to Field and Stream, and I said, hey, if you guys want to write about some world-class bird hunting, you got to come down to the New Mexico Boot Heel and some of the, these beautiful rolling Chihuahuan desert grasslands mixed with juniper forest and ponderosa pine. And I said, and guess what? We're only about 2 miles away, 1 mile away from the New Mexico border. And it's just some of the most wild and rugged and diverse terrain. And I was happy Hal came out and was able to do that podcast with us with backcountry hunters and anglers. And we ended up getting a big feature in Field and Stream as well. But that place has my heart for a couple of different reasons. One, it's right in the heart of the Animas Valley, which stretches across two countries, Mexico and the U.S. And right on the other side of that Animas Valley, you can see the Sierra Madre Occidental, which is where my grandpa hunted. That's where my grandpa spent his days, hunting everything: cougar, Coues deer, mule deer, javelina, Gould's turkey. I grew up watching him. He didn't take me hunting a lot, but when he would bring home, the animals, and he'd skin them and dress them right outside our tiny little patio behind the railroad tracks in Ciudad Juarez. I was like, where are these animals coming from? I was like, where the heck is my grandpa going? And he had 10 kids, and so anytime he got to go and escape the home life into the mountains for a little while, I'm sure he made the most of it. But for me to be able to stand in that valley and look across, the way to another country and know that my grandpa was in the mountains, that on the other side doing the same thing I'm doing is something that brings me great joy, and that just makes me feel good about that place. And so, the New Mexico Boot Heel. I just got to make a quick plug for this, but this is one of the places where this administration wants to build a border wall, and it's unconscionable to me that we would build a wall there. What that represents in terms of altering the ecology of this special place is just devastating and disgusting and horrible for me to think about. But anyways, it's a place that needs to be protected, doesn't need a wall, but is just gorgeous.
Yeah, it definitely does not need a wall. And my buddy, really good longtime buddy and a friend who's been on the podcast, Jay Clayburg, he was in a documentary by Ben Masters called The River and the Wall, where they explored that in Texas, on the Texas-Mexico border. Oh, yeah. And just how absurd it would be to put up a wall there. And so it's obviously not New Mexico, but for people who want to learn more about kind of the wildlife and natural side of the destruction that wall would cause, they can go check out that documentary. It's
that's a great film.
Yeah. Good people. So knowing everything you're involved in so many things in a mere 35 years, which makes me feel bad about myself, but that's a different story. No. No, you've accomplished all this great stuff, and you've thought deeply on all these subjects. And we're in a very, an inflection point in history. I mean, we are living through history, and there's a lot of things changing. I mean, do you have any kind of parting words of wisdom? Just if the people that are listening to this, if you could leave them with one thought, does anything come to mind?
I guess I'll speak to what I know, what I'm passionate about. And I'd say that the nature of the outdoors and the outdoor world, outdoor recreation, whether you fish, you hike, you hunt, you surf, you kayak, you paddle, you mountain bike, you climb, whatever it is you do, your sport is changing, your hobby is changing, your campground is changing, your trail is changing, your river is changing. And and either you hop on or you get left behind. And people of color are getting outdoors. There's amazing organizations out there that are just promoting diversity, amongst the outdoors, and big national organizations that are slowly and finally starting to get it and actually promote policies that create more equitable access and opportunities. And so, spaces that have been traditionally white will no longer be white. Secret spots will no longer be secret, and hunters and anglers and hikers and everybody in between will look different. And so not only should you be okay with that, not only should you tolerate that, but you should embrace that, and you should welcome a new set of outdoor users with open arms. It's up to us to be the change that we want to see. So when you see that person that you may have never seen on your trail, or that you think maybe doesn't belong there, you know what? Go have a conversation with them. Go smile when you're passing them on the trail. Ask them if they need anything. Be a good friend. Be a good steward of the place that you love. And that doesn't mean just for the conservation world, but for people too. And so that would be my parting thought, as anyone who listens to this podcast, that you welcome those folks, that you be a good friend, and collectively we're all better taking care of our special places together. And that's what's coming.
Perfect, man. I really appreciate everything you do and all the hard work that you put in on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. But I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to talk, because I know time is everything. So keep up the good work. Thank you very much. And I can't wait to hang out in person one of these days.
Hey, Ed, it's a pleasure. I owe you a beer sometimes. And I'll be happy when we get to see each other in person soon, man. So thank you so much.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast, and thanks for listening to that particular episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Before you go, I've got 3 quick things. Number 1, if you like the podcast, please do me a huge favor. Either pass it along to a friend who may be interested, share it on your social media, or go to iTunes and give it a 5-star review. All those things would mean a lot to me, and they would really help to spread the word about the podcast. Number 2, if you've listened to many of these episodes, you know that I love reading and I love talking about books. Every other month, I send out a quick email with a few books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The subjects are varied, but they're pretty much all nonfiction with an emphasis on history, biographies, adventure narratives, and topics related to the American West. There are no sales pitches for ranches, no spam, no other kind of nonsense, just books. So if you'd like to sign up for the list, head to Mountain and Prairie/reading, or just go to Mountain and Prairie and there's a massive tab at the top that says book recommendations. Click on it. There are a ton of good books that I've read. Some of the old email lists are on there. You can go crazy. There are a lot of books. And finally, if you know anyone I should interview for the podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. All my contact info is at mountainandprairie.com, and I'm on all the social media stuff, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, blah, blah, blah. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to have some recommendations and suggestions of interesting people I should meet. All right, that's it. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.